call the honourable member Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Labor does support this bill, as our Veterans Affairs spokesperson Phil Goff has already outlined, and we do have some changes that we would like to make to the legislation as well. And I'll come back to both our support for the legislation and the changes that we would like to make. But I want to say at the outset, sir, that Melissa Lee really needs to just think about history, and she is someone who I think does understand the importance of history, and certainly the importance of her nation's history. And she's spoken about the association between New Zealand and Korea since the Korean conflict and the role that New Zealand soldiers played in that conflict. So she has an understanding of history, and she understands the significance of knowing your history and getting things right. But what Melissa Lee got up and said, or she asked the question, why didn't Labor do anything about a replacement for the 1954 War Pensions Act, suggesting that Labor did nothing. Well, the truth could not be further from that could not be further from the truth, sir, because what Labor did is we worked with the RSA to identify what the issues were, and there was an agreement between Rick Barker. It was in fact Rick Barker who was the Minister for Veterans Affairs, not Phil Goff, as Melissa Lee suggested. It was Rick Barker who worked with the then President of the New Zealand Return Service Association, and he initiated the Law Commission report into the 1954 Act. The ball started rolling back in 2006. It was Labor who got the work started on this. And in fact, it wasn't too long after the change of government when the Law Commission came back with its recommendations. It was June 2010 when the Law Commission came back with its report, its comprehensive report, and its recommendations for how the new legislation should be constructed. June 2010. We now find ourselves nearly 4 years later, because Nationals sat on their hands for years after that Law Commission report came back. So, Melissa Lee, do not get up in this chamber and say that Labor did nothing. Labor started the work, and then it was National that delayed the progress on this legislation. So do not attempt to say that the Labor government or Labor in opposition hasn't done enough for veterans. There is only one party that has dragged their feet. There is only one party. There is only one party that has dragged their feet on this legislation, and it's the National Party. It's the National Party. So, yes, actually, the Labor government put far more money into the armed services. I'm glad that Mike Sabin raised that, because the Labor government had to rescue the Defence Forces from years of underinvestment by that national government. Our troops, the vehicles that our troops had to drive around in Bosnia, the armed vehicles, the armoured personnel carriers that our troops went to Bosnia in, couldn't keep up with the freight transport vehicles of our allies. That was the state of our armed forces after 9 years of the national government. So again, Mike Sabin, get your history right. Don't tell us that Labor isn't interested in the Defence Forces. Don't tell us that Labor isn't interested in veterans, because Labor has consistently been the government that puts more money into the Defence Forces and puts more money into veteran support. 9 long years of National in the 90s saw our Defence Forces eroded to almost nothing. Eroded to almost nothing under the national government. So what happened when that Law Commission report came? When that Law Commission report came back to Parliament, National sat on it. National sat on it. But what's worse than that, actually, is that what National then did was they picked and chose what aspects of the Law Commission report they would actually implement. Yes, this legislation is good. This legislation is a great improvement on what we had in the 1954 Act. There's a huge improvement on what we had in the 1954 Act. But there are things missing. And that's because this national government isn't interested in doing the full deal for veterans. And it's over an amount of money that is so insignificant, $11 million. $11 million, reducing over time. Often when you bring a new initiative in, it costs a certain amount in year one, and then the costs increase in the out years. In this case, $11 million decreasing over the following few years to $8 million. Well, if $11 million is money that this government cannot find to make sure that veterans get a fair deal, then the government's books must be in a very, very sorry state of affairs indeed. If $11 million is going to be the difference between, I don't know, maybe reaching surplus or not, then this government has clearly failed on a number of fronts. I think that what National should do is support Phil Goff's supplementary order paper. It makes sense. It makes sense. It's what the Law Commission recommended, and it's what the RSA wants. And in the grand scheme of things, it is not a huge amount of money to recognise the service of our veterans, not just our veterans from prior conflicts such as Vietnam and Korea, and those who are still left from World War II, but also to recognise those who have served us in recent years in places like East Timor and Afghanistan and the Solomon Islands. That's what this government should be doing. But it refuses, because I really can't tell why. They will make the claim that it costs too much, but it patently doesn't. It clearly does not cost too much. So I want to hear from the government members their explanation for why it is that they did not support this recommendation at Select Committee. Why is it exactly? Because it can't be the cost. It can't be the cost. $11 million cannot be money that they can't find. They found $1 billion to give tax cuts to the top 10%. They found $800 million to bail out South Canterbury Finance. They found $30 million to bail out Rio Tinto. They found $27 million to give to private schools. The money's out there. The money is out there. They're perfectly capable of spending money on the people that they choose. Why can't they spend this tiny amount of money on veterans? Why? I want to hear from the members opposite why it is. Why is it that they can't spend that money? So as I said, though, that is a change that we do want to see to the legislation, but overall this is an improvement on what we had before, because the 1954 legislation was becoming outdated, it was becoming outmoded, and that is why Labor initiated the review of the legislation. The 1954 Act actually hadn't changed in any significant way in the, what are we now trying to count, many decades since it was first enacted. And it was, as is often the case, it was legislation that was responsive to the needs at the time. And it was responsive primarily to the needs of World War II veterans. And of course, it came in about a decade before, 2 decades before ACC was established. And ACC has changed the playing field for what veterans are entitled to and what they can receive through the normal social security framework that we have in New Zealand. And so we needed a new system that recognised not only the change, but recognised that we have some veterans who receive an entitlement based on service that they gave before ACC came in, and some veterans based on service that they undertook after ACC came in. So the bill acknowledges those differences and sets up 2 separate schemes for those different groups of veterans, and that is a significant improvement. So overall, what this legislation does is it implements a number of the Law Commission recommendations. We think it should implement more of them, and we have a supplementary order paper to that effect. But in general, sir, we do support this legislation.
I call the honourable